Welcome, everyone. This session is called It's Time to Write Your Book, Making the Move to Book-Length Nonfiction Writing. I'm Jillian Turnbull, Director of the School of Writing and Publishing at the University of King's College in Halifax. And with me today, I have our author panelists, who I will introduce to you in a moment. I also have with me our nonfiction cohort director, Kim Pittaway, and we're here to answer any questions you may have specifically about the MFA program, and you're welcome to bring those into the discussion when we go into our Q&A session. Our panelists today are all graduates of the MFA in Creative Nonfiction, and they're going to talk to you today about moving into writing a full-length manuscript after spending time in another career, whether that career was directly connected to writing or not. How did they come to start writing their books? So the way we're going to structure today's session is our panelists are each going to give a short talk on the writing and publishing process. And then after they're all finished, we'll move into the Q&A segment. I'll ask our authors a couple of questions to get them going, and then we'll open the floor to you. And so you're welcome to put your questions into the Q&A box that is found at the bottom of your screen, and I will read them out to our participants. And here's just a reminder for everyone that we're recording today's session, and it will be posted to our King's YouTube channel if you want to review any portion of it again. And some of you may have noticed you're not appearing on screen and you're not on the audio, so not to worry, that will not be part of the recording. It's just going to be me and our panelists, and that's what's going to be posted to YouTube. All right, so I'm just going to share a little bit of info from our each of our panelists here and introduce them all to you. So to start, we're going to hear from Marilyn Carr. Marilyn Carr's resume is mostly distinguished by too many hours spent in frequent flyer lounges. She is astonished that as a management consultant and software industry analyst, people actually believed what she said. She has authored hundreds of pieces of business writing for software giants like Microsoft, Oracle, and SAP, which have been downloaded many thousands of times, even though none of them is very funny. Her first memoir, Nowhere Like This Place, Tales from a Nuclear Childhood, was published in 2020. It was a finalist for the Penguin Random House MFA Prize and was on the long list for the Leacock Medal. Her second memoir, How I Invented the Internet, was published in 2022 and is on the Leacock long list for 2023. She is currently working on the latest installment, If It's Shreveport, It Must Be Tuesday, and she blogs about the absurdity of everyday life at marilyncarr.com. Gregor Craigie is an author and CBC radio host in Victoria, BC. His first book, On Borrowed Time, North America's Next Big Earthquake, was published by Goose Lane Editions in 2021 and was a finalist for the Basili Prize for Public Policy and the City of Victoria Book Prize. Gregor has also written a children's nonfiction book for Orca Books titled Why Humans Build Up: The Rise of Temples, Towers, and Skyscrapers. His first novel, Radio Jet Lag, will be published by Cormorant Books this June. Gregor is currently writing a book about Canada's housing crisis for publication by Penguin Random House in 2024. Susan McLeod is an artist writing and drawing about long-term care in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Her humorous book, Dying for Attention, a graphic memoir of nursing home care, was released in 2021 by Conundrum Press and follows her 9-year journey shepherding her mother through a callous system while nagging an indifferent sibling. The book was given an outstanding in its genre review by the American Library Association publication Booklist. She atones for once being the government spokesperson defending the very system she experienced as brutally cold and non-communicative by continuing to draw about caregiving issues. Her illustrations have been published by Kaiser Permanente, Halifax Magazine, Lion's Roar Magazine, Maisonneuve, The Fold, and the Globe and Mail. Laura Pratt is a journalist who has written for Canadian magazines for 3 decades. These days, she mostly makes her living as a book editor for self-publishing authors. Her second book, Heartbroken: Field Notes on a Constant Condition, was published this month by Penguin Random House Canada. She is a 2020 graduate of the King's Creative Nonfiction MFA, and she lives in Toronto. And finally, Christian Smith holds a doctorate in the molecular and cellular biology of cancer from the University of Toronto, has over 2 decades experience as a research scientist, and since 2006 has held the position of Manager of Research Operations at the world-renowned Brain Tumor Research Center in Toronto. Christian returned to graduate studies and completed an MFA in Creative Nonfiction from the University of King's College in 2017. He published his debut nonfiction book, The Scientist and the Psychic, a son's exploration of his mother's gift, with Penguin Random House Canada in 2020. So welcome to all of our panelists, and we're going to start with Marilyn Carr. Take it away, Marilyn.
Thank you, Jillian. So a bit about my journey to King's College and publishing my 2 books now. So I always knew, or always had in the back of my head, I wanted to write a book. And I was pretty sure it was going to be nonfiction because I was also pretty sure that fiction was harder. I think that notion has totally gone now. But however, I was one of the people that happened upon the ad in the Walrus for the King's College MFA. And at that point, I was winding down my career as at that point, a software industry analyst. And I'd spent a lot of my time writing extremely boring software-y things. So the change to more creative writing was sort of always in the back of my mind. So I was lucky enough to see the ad for the MFA, and a couple of things appealed to me. One, the nonfiction focus of the program at that point, and also that it was non-resident, so I didn't have to go away somewhere and live somewhere else for the duration of the program. But really, what I really wanted to learn about was how to write a book. I had no idea where to start, and I'm a very process-oriented person. I like to know what the steps are to get somewhere. So that was really what I was looking forward to at King's, and I got that in spades. I wasn't quite sure completely when I started what I was going to write about. There were a couple of ideas in my head. And then eventually I got prompted that I had not yet submitted my statement to the program in terms of what was I going to do, where was I at, and I kind of had to pull that out of my rear end. When I got there, it finally gelled about, I was a quarter of the way through what exactly I was going to write about, which is my first memoir about growing up in Deep River, Ontario. This couple of things that I appreciated most about the program, what I got out of it. One is the structure of how to write a book. As I said, I had no idea where to start. So that was really, really useful for me, the whole idea of how do you map out what you're going to do, what's your arc going to be, what's your timeline going to be, who are going to be the people, the characters in the book. That was extremely useful to me. The second thing, but kind of goes hand in hand with that, was how to write a proposal. I had no idea. I had no idea what a book proposal was. And even though I never actually, I think once I submitted my proposal intact to a potential publisher, but it was really, again, the process of going through, thinking through, what is this book about? Who's going to buy it? Who's going to read it? Where does it fit in the lexicon of books of this type? And of course, the pitch. I mean, it really helped with being very succinct about, the elevator conversation of what's your book about, as opposed to, fumbling about to go, well, I don't know, it's kind of about this or about that. No, getting that really crisp and being able to articulate, well, what it's about and why it's interesting, why it's an interesting thing to have out there in the universe. So those are the 2 main things that I got out of the program, other than actually the book itself. But also in terms, just a couple of words about the publishing journey. I, as an analyst and as a management consultant, as I said, I approach everything as a process and steps. So I did a lot of research in terms of potential publishers, why they would want a book like mine or why they wouldn't. So they got crossed off the list, and how to position my book as something that would fit within their portfolio of books being published, either, had been published recently or looked like they were coming out in their catalog shortly thereafter. But the real trick for me and it's turned out, I found a publisher that actually got my platform, which my first book is really The Town of Deep River. And if they didn't know anything about it, they dismissed it out of hand. And when I found a publisher that knew about it and believed in it as a book people would want to read, then everything just took off from there. And it's been very, very successful. And I guess I'll stop there for now, Jillian.
Thanks very much, Marilyn. So I'm going to come back and ask you some more questions to follow up. But for now, why don't we move over to Gregor?
Thanks, Jillian, and thanks, Marilyn. A lot of what I was going to say sounds pretty similar to Marilyn, so I'll try not to be too repetitive in the next 5 minutes. But for me as a daily journalist, and I guess by the time I started the program in 2017, I had been a daily journalist for 20 years. So writing wasn't as much of a challenge, and that's just a factor of doing it every day. Like I was writing scripts, writing pieces for web and radio interviews every day for 20 years, so that the writing wasn't a challenge, but I had all sorts of book ideas in my head, as is evidenced by the 4 books that Jillian mentioned. And actually, I wanted to keep the bio to within 100 words. So I've got a children's novel coming out 2025, another nonfiction coming out 2024. I'm trying to sell a young adult novel I've finished, which is all to say that I had a lot of books in my head. I didn't know how to realize them. And that's what King's was fantastic for. So my first mentor, Ken McGugan, was incredibly helpful, as was David Hayes, my second mentor. But right from the get-go, Ken and I went out for coffee, and he said, "But it seems to me you know how to write. What are you here for?" "Well, Ken, I don't know how to organize. I don't know how to pitch a book," like Marilyn said, "and I don't know just how to use my time most efficiently and so on. I don't even know if this is feasible." And so we kind of looked at my daily schedule, found an hour and a half, because I work extremely early hosting a morning show. And then this all started when my youngest son entered kindergarten. And lo and behold, I had an hour and a half every day. And I turned that into a very effective writing habit. For me, it doesn't work to sort of do an 8 to 10 hour binge, so to speak, once a week or once a month or what have you. I need that daily habit. I get on my bike after work, go home, and I'm immediately starting to think of where I was just writing yesterday and how I can pick it up right away. And it's been very efficient. So Ken helped me kind of identify what would work well for me. And then he got me to focus on, well, how do you write a book? I mean, do you just start from the opening paragraph and see where it goes? Or I mean, probably some people do, but with nonfiction, and I've actually found now with 3 novels, structure really helps me. And Ken said, let's just think about this like a house. I mean, you wouldn't, pick up a couple of 2x4s and start building a house and see where it goes. You want to plan ahead of time. That doesn't mean you can't change it. And of course, almost always you will change as you go along, and then you edit and so on. But so that was extremely helpful. And now saying it sounds kind of simple. And part of me wonders why it was such a mystery and such a struggle. But I think that's one of the great things about the King's program. And lest anybody who's contemplating the program thinks, what is this, some kind of weird timeshare thing? I have no vested interest in getting you to go to King's, like none. So I'm just reflecting my experience, that it was extremely useful for me to get me into the habit of realizing these books that I wanted to write. So the last thing I'll say is that as Marilyn mentioned, the idea of writing a book proposal was super helpful. I sold the first book through an agent, Chris Bucci, who I signed up with in New York. He was my agent. In the end, I ended up ending the relationship very amicably. I'm grateful to Chris for what he did, but I just felt like I have such an eclectic list of books that I want to do. It didn't really make sense for him to be doing them. Like I pitched this novel that is now coming out in June with Cormorant. And it's a purportedly humorous novel. I'll let the readers be the judge of that. It may be, I may regret calling it that. But the agent was like, well, I don't think you should set this in Victoria. It should be Toronto or New York. Maybe don't try to be funny. And, so fair enough. I mean, that was his read because he's got to make money on it. But in the end, he wanted me to do something totally different. And I thought, no, I think I'm just going to sell this myself. But I have, including this latest nonfiction, to Penguin Random House. And honestly, so many of the skills came from going through it through the King's program. And it was, I have no regrets. It was an excellent experience for me, and I'm grateful that I went, and look forward to future discussions. But why don't I be quiet now for whoever's next?
Well, thanks very much. And of course, I have lots of questions for you coming out of that too. But as promised, we'll move on to our next panelist. Up next is Susan McLeod. Take it away, Susan.
Hi. Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And again, much of what I wanted to say, Marilyn and Gregor have said. But I think one of my key messages is don't be afraid of not knowing anything, because I knew absolutely nothing when I started this journey, but I started it, and after that it's baby steps, and they might go in the wrong direction, but you'll get there. I had to take early retirement because I was the only advocate and caregiver for my mother when she went into long-term care, and that was 9 years of long-term care that from the very beginning, assisted living, through to the various levels of care. And it was a very eye-opening experience for me, and a very lonely experience. So my book came out of a passion. I felt people need to know about this. I can't believe we have a society. I was so naive that where our elderly are treated with the most minimum of compassion. Yes, they're given care, but there was no love in that care, or no room for it. It was all budget-based and system-based. Anyway, so I had this burning urge to talk about this. And like Gregor, I was a public relations writer. That was my career. I was in communications. I knew that coming from that kind of soul-numbing kind of writing, that I didn't want to write the book. And I also knew that caregivers in my position are exhausted. So I wanted to draw it. When I was a young parent with 2 toddlers, I found a parenting book that was done in cartoons. And again, I could read that so simply and quickly, because at that time I was also exhausted. So I knew there was benefit in putting some of these messages into a graphic format, and that's what I wanted to do. And some of my mentors were trying to persuade me to go and write, but I stuck to my guns. And very kindly, King's provided me with a mentor specifically for graphics. So that's another benefit. As Marilyn and Gregor said, the book proposal is invaluable. It teaches you how to think through in detail what your project is going to be and how it's going to go. The process, as Marilyn said, is very good, particularly if you're a creative person and you're running off madly in all directions. Process can really ground you. So I'm very grateful. I valued the program, and for the contacts that they gave me, the how-tos, and also just the encouragement, because I had never been a cartoonist, or I had an aptitude. I have a fine arts degree from way back, but I didn't know how to proceed. But I just had this burning desire that overrode the thing that said, but you have no clue what you're doing. And King's provided me the support that helped me move forward, like I say, in baby steps, and pick me up when I needed to, when I had splat in a puddle. So yeah, so be brave. And, I guess that's my big message.
Thanks, Susan, and a great message. Yes, be brave. I mean, that's really what it takes to get a book going. And if you are, it all unfolds from there. Thanks so much. So let's move on to Laura.
Yeah, I apologize. I got here late. I could not find the Zoom link as predicted. But So I didn't hear what the initial question was, though I could guess at it, but if you wouldn't mind repeating it for me, Jillian.
Certainly, Laura. Yeah. So what I'm doing is just asking everybody to talk about their experience of basically deciding to move from whatever they were doing beforehand into finally tackling the manuscript that they had wanted to write for so long, and then perhaps how that paired with your decision to come to King's as well. So yeah, and what that process was like for you.
All right. Well, it wasn't for me, it wasn't so much moving from one thing to another as accommodating in my life, this project of writing a book, because I'm one of the population of King's students who had a full-time job and didn't just worked around it because I'm a freelancer. So back then I was more of a freelance writer than editor, but I've since shifted more into freelance editing. And but the point is, I never stopped my full-time job. And so for me, it was accommodating a book. I knew I always wanted to write. And it was one of those cases where, if I could have written it, I would have. That's what I told myself. That's what other people told me too, especially when I was defending why I was prepared to lay down the big bucks to go back to school. And it was borne out that it was worth it. It was worth laying down the big bucks because obviously I did write the book thanks to King's, and wouldn't have, I know I wouldn't have, because I didn't before then. So King's gave me the structure. I don't mean the structure of the book. I mean, of course, the infrastructure inside which I would write it. Gave me the deadlines and the expectations and the sounding board and the guidance and everything that you need to flesh out a book. Yeah, I liked Gregor's hour and a half because I sort of had to do a similar thing where I had to carve out dedicated time because I was all too aware that if I didn't, I wouldn't, because my work would just fill in around and my kids and the rest of my life. And so I had to be quite disciplined, but again, it was King's that gave me that discipline. It was King's that said, you have to deliver X amount of words by X date. And that was really meaningful to me. And it was thanks to that I was able to see it through. So I guess my message would be for people who, because I remember being in this place, people who are hesitant about taking on a degree and a book project around their already busy life. I would say, you can do it. You can do it. You'll be surprised at how beholden you feel to King's. You want to make them proud. You want to make your mentors proud, and you want to participate in the expectations that the program sets out for you. And so you get it done. And it's not disruptive. It enhances your life. It doesn't disrupt your life, the rest of your life. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura. I love that idea too, that, it just is an addition to your life rather than something that interrupts. That was very true for me too. Yeah. Christian, why don't we hear from you?
Well, yeah, thank you for asking me to participate. So I learned about the King's MFA from our very esteemed Jillian, the director of the program. We were in a book club and I was sharing that I had this wacky mother who had psychic abilities and I wanted to write a book about it. And she told me about the program. So that's how I ended up enrolling. And so the real factors for me of why I actually enrolled was three things. First was the accountability, because I knew if I was left to my own devices, it would never happen. And the second would be the mentorship and guidance, because I had, first of all, had no idea that I had to write a proposal. That was, I just thought I'd write the book. And secondly, I had no idea how to write dialogue, and I'm an academic, so most of the stuff is all passive tense and boring and snoozy. So to make it exciting, that's where I relied upon the mentorship to do that. But the main one was the ability to do it remotely. And, a couple of weeks during the summer, it was holidays that I had to do, on site. And being able to maintain the full-time job to actually, make a living and pay for the program as well as real life stuff, that was the main draw to this program. So when I was actually in the program, though, I was just thinking of what we just heard from Laura about the word count, and I was a little bit worried about that, but I ended up, because we're working on the proposal, much of the time in the program, I was still doing a lot of research and structuring the novel. I was exploring, techniques. So that's your time to really sort of play with the material, I found. And I was never felt I was under the gun, but I always had to account for what I was doing. So a lot of that was research. So organization to me is what I learned during that time. That at the time I was using Evernote, everything went in there. But there are obviously other things to do it. So that's the first thing I would recommend, is be very organized. And the second thing is that I learned during that program was not to worry about the whole book, but to chunk it into pieces. And I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was David Hayes or Ken that said, write in scenes. Like right now, if you have a book in your mind, everyone has this burning image of a scene. There has to be. And so start with that. And as soon as you start with that, other things start to pop in your mind and you can move on from there. So I found that very helpful. And then, so that was during the program. And so how I went about it after, I sort of broke it up. So beforehand was before and after the book deal, because I didn't feel the pressure during the program. But when I signed the book contract, that's when I felt the pressure, because I had a deadline and they wanted the whole book, not just 10,000 words. So that's when I learned to chunk out the time. And I think I was very lucky. I don't have any children like Gregor has. And so I didn't have that, but I have pets, so that counts. And as well as the job. But so I learned to work in the mornings. And the other thing is you don't need 2 hours. That's one thing that if I knew then what I know now, that's not what I need. You need 30 minutes. Just even if that's, I felt like I couldn't write anything unless I had 2 hours blocked off. And that's a fallacy. So that's what I've learned now. And you block off that time. And I was dealing with health issues. So you just work around all of these things. Like my neck started, because I was at a computer all day, right? So my neck was doing, so I just learned to write in bed with this laptop stand. So there's little things that we can all do to make the ability to write the book. And I think I'll just stop rambling there and we can move on.
Thanks, Christian. So something that came up amongst all of you that I'd like to follow up on is this issue of fitting it into your existing life, right? You all had to, keep working or keep dealing with other things that were of great importance, caring for children and parents and all, the sort of mix of daily life. And so I'm just curious to follow up on that a little more. Obviously, all of us here are dealing with the things that come up on a daily basis that either we expect or we don't. And how do you make a regular practice of writing around that when so many things loom and threaten to take over your time? What are some of your tips to offer incoming writers or just beginning writers?
Can I jump in since I was the last up? I would say, well, part of the King's program is what I liked about it is I didn't feel out of place. I felt at home, because I think the youngest person was 21. I think the oldest was 70. So I was like right in the middle. So it was perfect. So you have all sorts of peers. And when you're in the program, you meet people, and we formed in our mentor groups, friendships that persisted well beyond the program. So the accountability that you have in the program can persist outside of the program. And so that would be the key thing, is if you can get a writing partner, or even better, a writing group from the people that you would meet in the MFA, then you will continue to have that accountability and make sure that you're getting feedback on your work, but also that you're actually producing on your own schedule.
Anyone else? Feel free to jump in, anyone. Yeah.
Jillian, I can say something. I have health issues as well. So I sleep like 12 hours a day. This is what is required for me to keep going in life. And so I wanted to say the answer to that is math. So I had 2 chapters finished to go with my book proposal. And when I finally got a publisher, I had a year to finish the other 11 chapters. So I just did the math. I did, and I have an occupational therapist, so she helped me. So she said, what you're going to do is you're going to write or draw, in my case, in half-hour chunks. You're going to take a half hour off, and you're not going to do the laundry. You're going to sit down. Then you're going to write or create another half hour. And I did that for at most 2.5 hours a day when I was really under a crunch, but 2 hours with this very strict discipline schedule. And the math told me I could meet my publisher's deadline in that year by doing that every day. Like I think I did it 7 days a week, but and only took days off when I couldn't avoid it. So that it can be done. It just takes a lot of discipline and figuring out the math. So I just wanted to say that.
I second what Susan says about the math. Like right now, the one I'm working on, it's funny to me. I spent 8 months before I finally sold Penguin Random House on a book about housing, because for understandable reasons, they were gun shy. The editors were like, we want this. And the salespeople were sort of, yeah, the housing market's going to change in the time. They weren't sure. So finally I convinced them, 8 or 9 months. And then I've got 6 months to write 60 to 70,000 words. And I'm working with this fantastic editor who she and I were like, let's be realistic, but ambitious. So we basically did the math. And she said, based on your past writing experience, how much can you how long does it take you to do X number of interviews, X amount of research? And so we came up with a very specific schedule, which feels tight, but it's doable based on that hour and a half I have a day. I'm getting about 3 chapters done a month, which sounds like a lot, but the chapters are about half of the length of my first book to try to make it move. But we've got a very specific schedule, and I did the same thing that Susan recommended. We did it together, and it was doing the math. And I think that people need to be realistic about when can I do it, and then you stick with it. But the one last thing I'll say quickly is, for me, the reason it's worked is because I'm really busy. I've got 3 kids at 3 different schools, plus the full-time job. And as Laura said, I fit in the MFA. But for me, every time I did it, it rejuvenated me. It didn't feel like a chore. Sometimes you squeeze in life and you just think, I can't keep doing this. But for me, it was the exact opposite. It was a chore to make the time available. But every time I'd finish it, I'd think, no, that's way better. I like my job better. I am not distracted. I don't feel resentful or hard done by that I haven't realized things in life. It just, and not everybody will be that way, but to me, that's a sign of, if you're working hard to fit in the time, but then it's rejuvenating, then to me, it's worth it. And I hasten to add, because it occurred to me earlier, I should have mentioned it, don't do it for the money. We talk about the cost of the program, which is definitely worth considering. Do not enter this program or write a book to make money. If you do, good for you. And probably most of us have made some money, but don't do it. Don't let the money be your motivator.
Thanks, Gregor. And I'll just add to that my own story. I came into the program in the midst of paying off past student loan debt. And so it was a great sort of leap of faith that I made to come into the program several years back. And when I graduated, I had a solid book proposal, and I was able to take that to a granting body, and I applied for a provincial grant. And the grant I received to write the book actually completely canceled out the tuition I'd paid at King's. So there are ways to make money that you may not anticipate from the book industry coming to you. Like there are other paths to maybe, fund your writing for sure. Yeah. Marilyn or Laura, did you want to add to that?
I was going to say something about, I was remembering when I did the bulk of my writing, and it was the weekends. Like, don't be afraid to, like, to me, like as Gregor said, it was wonderful. It was so much fun. It wasn't like, oh, now my weekends are spoken for. I couldn't wait to do the creative work that my weekends were about, because my weekdays were about making money and I guess I did a little book work throughout the week, but I spend all day Saturday and all day Sunday for a long stretch working on my book. And so, people feeling like, geez, I don't have any extra time. Well, it's not a sacrifice if you love it. It's not like, oh, I'm giving up my weekend. No, you're finding something fabulous to do on your weekends. And yeah, so don't forget the weekends.
Just, I absolutely agree with the math. And to me, that was key for me as well, is how many words can I write realistically, not, no stretch targets going on here necessarily. And how does that play out in terms of the time I have? And once I figured that out, as Laura said, it was energizing and I loved doing it. And if you have to love doing it, there's no point in if it's a chore, then you shouldn't be doing it. You should just be doing something else that isn't a chore.
I just wanted to add that love doing it doesn't mean that it's easy. So I remember every day when I had to start that first half hour, I would procrastinate because I just thought, I don't know what made me think I could draw this. I can't draw. This is so bad. But once I started, so I avoided starting, but once I started and I got those 2.5 hours done in half-hour chunks each day, yes, at the end of that, there's something about the creative process that is fulfilling. And you feel like, yeah, life is worth living because something just came through me, that, my better self might have said, you can't do this, but I just ignored it and kept doing it. And it was very rewarding.
That's lovely to hear. Thanks, Susan. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing better than, even just as Christian was saying, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, sit down and knock out 100 words. It can feel great if those 100 words have been burning in your mind all night, get it down on paper, and you never know what will come after that. So we have some questions in the Q&A, and I encourage all of our attendees, if you have questions to ask our panelists, either about the writing process or about the program, feel free to throw them into the Q&A there. And some of them are being answered by our panelists. So if you are curious about the answers to some of those questions, you can open that box up and have a look. I'm going to answer one of them here. The question is, what percentage of students end up writing a book and what percentage gets their books published? So we're now in our 9th year of the program, and we're at about 50 books that have been published already, with several more coming down the pipeline over the next couple of years. And I would say all of our students come out with a good chunk of their manuscript done. They are required to produce typically about 15,000 words per term, and there are 4 terms in the whole degree. So a good percentage of your manuscript will be done by the time you graduate. Not necessarily the full manuscript, but certainly you're well on your way to getting a first draft of it complete. So we've had a fair, a decent return on the number of students who have come through and then gone on to pitch and publish with Canadian publishers. So we've got a few more questions that maybe I'll put out to our panelists. Here's one question. How does it work if you want to write a reported nonfiction book, i.e. not a memoir? Is there time for both research and writing, or should we have conducted a lot of research interviews beforehand? So maybe I'll put that out to the panelists. How did that go for you, the research process of the book you were writing?
Well, for me, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I have an awful lot of research in my book, and I would that was part of what I was doing on the weekends and in my book time. wasn't always writing. It was research. It was sitting at the library, surrounded by open books around me, and so yeah, I mean, when all of this reference to the math and making time and working it into your schedule, that's research and writing. I know some people's books didn't call for a lot of research, but mine certainly did, and so, you know, you put them both together, and you're not gonna do your writing till you've done your research.
I was going to say,
So-
oh, sorry, Susan. I'll just say quickly that it really helped me that I had years of research on for my first book, the earthquake book, before starting the master's program. I personally don't think you have to, because I also did a lot of research like Laura while writing it. But for me, continuing as Christian and Laura and others have mentioned, continuing to work full time and do the masters, which is a lot of time, it really helped me that I had this quite a lot of research piled up. But having said that, I think it is just, Laura says, it's the research and the writing, and I'm certainly finding that with the current book I'm working on. So a bit of both.
So I just wanted to say that my research was done during the program when I was creating with each mentor, when I was creating the narrative arc and then what the contents of each chapter would be, I was also doing the research that was required for the content of those chapters, so that when I did get a publishing contract, all I was doing was finishing the drawing. So I just had to, yeah, King's got me to the chapter outlines, the contents, that was all in my book proposal. That's including what the research was. So when I had to meet my publishing deadline, it was simply the drawing, the final drawing, certainly with that.
I can interject. So like Susan, all of my research was done during the program because I had some newspaper clippings that I had, stockpiled away, but I had nothing done beforehand. So I had, even though it was a memoir and it's sort of a side to this question, but there was a lot of verification that I needed to do. So that was a lot of interviews with people that I didn't know or even had met yet. So I had to contact them, find ways to go. I traveled to LA, to Vancouver to do these things and sort of piggybacked on vacation time. But so all of it was research. And in fact, I think I only got like 20,000 words in actual chapters during the program. The rest was the book proposal. And about 90% of that got rewritten anyway. So I wouldn't get too worried about having the final format of the book by the time the 2 years are up. It's the book proposal that's the main thing, and having that real confidence that you know where you're going with your project to write it when you're finished.
What you'll find out in the program is that even if you're doing a memoir, you need to do research. And because, as I said, my first book, there was an alarming number of facts that had the nerve to insert themselves into my book that needed to be verified. Like, for one thing, the moon landing. I was convinced, because it was my brother's birthday, July 20th, when the moon landing happened, the first one. And I was convinced it had happened in the evening, like after dinner. And I had to do the research. No, in fact, it was at 3 p.m. EST or something like that. It was in the afternoon. So, but because if somebody's reading your book and you're writing about a time period, if there are things that are wrong, it's going to totally distract them from your story. And they're going to think that you're making it all up, even though you're not supposed to be doing that for memoir. But so research is a given, regardless of what type of book you're writing. And in the case of memoir, you probably have to do it incrementally, because you have to do it verifying and also adding color as you're writing, as opposed to doing it in advance, because you've no idea what's going to show up, in my instance anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Marilyn. Another question, are there strategies or mantras to help you, to the panelists, let go of big chunks of what you've written? So you've got something you think is beautiful and it should be in the book, and then you realize, either through an editor or a rereading you do down the road, that it just can't stay. So what do you do to cope with that?
Well, I can do a quick answer. It's sharing it with your either your peers or your writing group. You quickly learn that it isn't so great, or there's questions that are raised, or cliches that are exposed, or something like that. So you quickly learn that your, precious words aren't so precious after all. And once it gets repetitive, you don't take it personally. You just say, oh, that's better. And you just, I don't know, ideas start to spark when you have that criticism put up, and you can respond to it and find better ways. So it becomes easier and easier as you go on, especially when your editor insists.
I can jump in, and like you said, Christian, you have to know that what you've done isn't you. You don't have to take it pretty. And that's one of the benefits of having had a career in writing, is that early on I knew how to accept a critique. And plus I'd been to art school where all your painting is put up in 20 peak it in front of everybody. So you quickly learn that to take the valuable information and not take it and use it, but not take it personally. But you mentioned mantras, and I just want to make a pitch for mantras, because I had so much trouble starting each day because I thought I was so bad that I did repeat a few, I don't know what they're affirmations, but I would say, may I approach my creative work with loving kindness, discipline, patience, confidence, and joy. May my creative work be of benefit to others. I know this all sounds weird, but it helped me start. May I face my fears with bravery. Those kinds of things. So anything that you can use to get you started, I found, though, just saying those things took it a bit out of myself, and I could start the day. So that's
On the topic of letting stuff go, my first manuscript was 120,000 words. And I think we got it down to 75 or 80. And my first editor was extremely helpful. And I mean, as a journalist, 20 years, I was used to, being raked over the coals and being told this is terrible or whatever, or you need to tweak it or whatever. But even then, it's hard to give up on 45,000 words. But she said, when she edited it all in red, she said, please do me the favor of reading it without looking at the edits. Like, in other words, don't look at what I've canceled. Please just look at what you've read and I have tweaked. And she said, the whole point is, I want you to focus on what's in this that we agree on. And that was so helpful. So, I mean, simply put, I focus on what is still there, what's agreed upon, and the idea of putting that out to the world and having it read. That doesn't mean it's always easy, because it's not, but I do think it really helps to focus on, fine, so I've spilled, a quarter of the jug, but look at the great cocktail or juice or whatever it is that's still in there that I'm bringing to the party.
Yeah, thanks, Gregor. And I'll just add one little bit to that. When I was writing my book, when I turned in the first draft, I felt I needed to prove that I knew what I was talking about with lots of statistics, lots of data, when my book really wasn't a data-driven book. And so my editors would go in and take these big chunks of statistics that I thought personally were also quite fascinating. And they would say, no, people don't want to read numbers. And so it was very hard for me, having spent all that time on research, to pull that material out. But what happens is, when you do pull that material out, it may have other places it can land. So you might end up writing an op-ed or some kind of column somewhere prior to your book coming out. You may just have it sort of in your bag as you go do Q&As or interviews, that kind of thing, and get asked questions that are not necessarily contained to the realm of your book. And so it's not wasted material, and it's important to not think of it like that, because it will probably always come in handy at some point in the process of getting the book out into the world. Yeah, there's a question here. Is it important to have a literary agent before sending work to publishers? And while there's a formal answer to that, which is that most of the big publishers do primarily talk only to agents, I want to kind of put that out to all of you for a bit of nuance, because some of you have agents and some of you don't. And so I'm just curious to hear what the experience has been like for you, whether with one or without.
I'll quickly say, only because I'm off mute, the general rule of thumb, as Jillian says, is yes, agents really help. They get you access as opposed to waiting for 6 months without even knowing if it's been received. You know, like you might get an auto reply. An agent gets it done. It gets it looked at. And so I had a big New York agent, and he got my book looked at. And in the end, I mean, that reflects on me. They didn't want it. So we went with a small independent, an excellent publisher. But then lo and behold, later on, I was able to get the biggest publisher in the country by myself. So there's an exception to every rule. But yeah, it is true. I believe it's true, even though I've chosen to go without an agent now, that if you can get an agent, I personally think it's worth the 15 or 20% because they can get you seen by all the publishers. And I would argue that's worth it to try anyway.
So I hope I'm not talking too much, but anyway, I'll just say for graphic memoirs in Canada, they don't go through agents, but my book sold, it went to a second print run, and it sold more in the States than it did in Canada. That's because in the States, there's a really big body of what's called a population who are interested in graphic medicine, which is the intersection of healthcare discourse and the comic arts. And so I got a lot of attention in the States. So now I'm taking an intensive online cartooning course, which I'm just loving, from the States. And I'm thinking if I get another good idea and I make a proposal, I will try and find an American agent for if I do another graphic narrative, because they're really into that. and so that it's also understanding the market for your particular book and whether an agent is going to help them or not.
Yeah, I'll take it from there. Thanks, Susan. I agree completely. So I don't have an agent, although I did speak to agents, pitch agents during the course of the program. But I kind of figured, based on the feedback, that my book was never going to be picked up by Penguin Random House or the big publishers anyhow. So I stuck with looking to the next tier down, and those were all direct pitches that I did, and it worked. But it is a lot of work. It is a lot of work. I think now that I've had success with my books that have been published so far, I could go to an agent and say, look, here's my stats of what my books have done. And, you know, do you want to work with me to pitch the third one? I think that's an avenue that's open to me now because I have a track record. But what I am looking for an agent, I'm starting to look for an agent now for the film rights for my book, my first book, because everybody has said that it ought to be at least a Netflix miniseries. So, and I know I don't know anything about that business. So I'm actively looking for an agent for that. And it's been around a couple of passes, but I'm hammering away on that one.
My first book, which I wrote 100 years ago, I did pre-Kings, and I didn't have an agent for it. And I can't even really remember the process, but I sold it. I sold it on my own to a small publisher, and it never went anywhere. And it was kind of, yeah, it wasn't anything I would chalk up as a huge success on my part. But then for my most recent book, Heartbroken, I did seek out and find an agent, and they were able to sell it to Penguin Random House, and you know, it's the biggest publisher in the world, and I have to think that's courtesy of my agent's part in the process. So, you know, just looking at my experience, I would recommend, like, unless you're like Marilyn and you know and are content with working with a smaller publisher, then I wouldn't bother with an agent, because, you know, I remember King's telling us this, and it certainly was my experience, that if you're going the route of getting an agent and then and then getting a publisher after that, it's so much work because you're really selling it twice. First, you're selling it to the agent, and then you're selling it to a publisher. And so if you can come to a place of peace with dealing only with publishers who don't require an agent as a go-between, then I would say go that route, because it really is a lot of work you feel like you're selling your soul twice. Like, I remember when I finally got an agent, I was like, I'm done. And then I went, wait, I only got an agent. I haven't gotten a publisher yet. And then I had to, get all riled up and do it, the whole thing again. And so there's something sort of exhausting about the double effort required when you go the agent route. So just, I guess my advice on that front would be, decide what kind of publisher you want, and then work backwards from there and see if you're going to have to get an agent to gain access to that publisher. And if you don't, then don't bother. Skip that step.
Yeah, my experience goes in between everybody. I didn't have an agent beforehand, and you get lots of chances to practice pitching during the program. And during one of these sessions, I met my future agent there, and she was, ran out after me and said, "You want to have coffee in Toronto?" And I said, "Sure." And so I ended up signing with her. And because of her, I got the deal with Random House. And in fact, not just Random House, but I had like interviews with all the different subsets of Random House, because it was kind of ridiculous. I was having interviews with, Simon and Schuster in one room, and then another, it was kind of weird. So, but because of her, it's well worth the 15%. But it's not just finding the publishers, it's also making sure you're protected, because they go through the contracts, and that's stuff that I didn't have to worry about. And that made me even feel even more confident about the whole process. Even though you do learn about that in the program, I didn't have to worry about it when I had an agent, because she was protecting my interests in that regard.
We just have a general question maybe to follow up on that, and that is, where or how do you find an agent? And so I will say, King's, during the program, you do have opportunities to pitch to both Canadian and American agents, primarily for practice as part of your experience as a student. But we have had cases where students have been successful, as we just heard from Christian, in pitching to an agent who then becomes interested in their work. In general, if you're looking to find an agent, just look for agencies in your city, and literary agencies in your city, and see if they're open for submissions. They might have individual agents that are open for submissions. Usually on the website, they will detail what that submission should look like, and the ways that you can contact them. And then, I would caution everybody to be prepared to wait, because agents are, receiving a lot of submissions all the time, to the point where sometimes they are closed off from them, and do take a long time to wade through the materials that they receive. But that's typically the route that you would take if you're looking for someone. I don't know if any of our panelists want to add to that about finding an agent. Doesn't look like it. All right. Here's another question for all of you. Do you have any advice for soliciting support from your current employer, either financially or for allowing for time off for the residency, or both? And this person says they're in communications and marketing, and write mainly for social media, and suggests that an MFA in long form writing might not strike their boss as something particularly useful, though they disagree. So how do you convince your employer that this would be a good upgrade for a potential employee looking to try the program?
Can I say quickly, Jillian, that sounds exactly like my experience, without wanting to say too much about the CBC, which is basically a good employer. But like, there was no, I was given the blessing, which wasn't actually what I was asking for. I was just interested in, well, so do you think this might be useful? And the message in a nutshell was, oh, that sounds interesting. Good luck to you. You know, like there was no agreement that it would be useful for my job or anything like that. So all that to say that I had to do it again for my own reason. And sorry, I know that's not specifically to the point of how to convince an employer. I had to do it all on my own time and at my own cost and so on. And there's been no benefit. In fact, working for my employer, I need to get permission from every book. So the employer didn't make it easy, but I realized I wanted to do it anyway. And in a way, that was kind of an answer in and of itself.
I can introduce mine if you want. I didn't.
Yeah.
I obviously my employer, my direct supervisor knew, and they were actually references for the program admission, so they were well aware of what I was doing. But they never really conflicted with each other. Obviously, it was more of a time thing where I had to allocate for myself. But as far as the financial aspects, they didn't support that. But as you go into the program, I found my own ways of finding financial gains from being in the program. Like you can create your own business and suddenly you have a whole bunch of expenses, including the tuition, that can be utilized for that. In addition to whatever tuition you would as personal. It worked better for me to do it through a corporation, but then every book I ever buy now is now part of a deduction. Even every movie I see, there's all sorts of things that you can use to your benefit now because it's all under that umbrella. So that's all I have to say there.
Thanks, Christian. And I'd add to that, in this particular instance of working in marketing and communications and writing on social media, you know, an MFA like the one at King's teaches you the basics of narrative, how narrative arc works, how a structure would work for telling a big story with many characters. And all of that is directly applicable to telling the story, say, of a brand or a company. And so you could make a case like that you're going to be learning how to connect with people on a human level and find characters and make them sympathetic to the audience that they're seeking and sort of tell stories from your company's perspective. And so that's perhaps one maybe sort of bigger skill set that a degree like this provides that's broadly applicable to a number of different scenarios. Yeah. Maybe I'll just, I just want to encourage everybody again to put questions into the Q&A button, and also to just open it up and look at which questions have been answered. We've got our cohort directors, Stephen Kimber and Kim Pittaway here, and they're answering questions for you in that Q&A box. I wanted to throw a question out to all of the panelists. So you've all published at least one book, and some of you more than one book. What is the second book experience like for you? How are you approaching your next project? How are you thinking about writing now that you don't have the support of the program behind you? How are you keeping up that writing practice and moving towards that next book project?
I'll jump in here, Jillian. I found that for me, it was pretty easy to replicate the process that I used for book one, which was done under the auspices and support of King's, for my second book. My other trick was when my first book was published and my little blurb on the back said that I'm currently working on my second book and gave it a title. So it was kind of like, okay, here's the line in the sand. I'm going to have to answer for it if that book never shows up. So I was able to, as I say, replicate the type of process and discipline that I used for the first book, and just went for it. I set my own timeline, my own, my own personal accountability, I guess, to do that. And then I just, for the third one that I'm just really just getting started with, I did the same thing. On the second book, the little blurb says I'm working on the third book, and there you go. If it doesn't show up, someone's going to notice, I think. But yeah, I just used all the tools and techniques and habits that I learned at King's, and just kept it moving. Which is also a way to get good return on your investment from the program. Is you can just keep that, just keeps being a thread in what you're doing, and just keep on keeping on.
I would echo what Marilyn said about the habits. That's really worked for me. And in my case, I've done such different books that a lot of it actually hasn't been applicable. Going from a book that's about engineering and science of earthquakes and the psychology of human response to a satirical novel about a sleep-deprived radio host. Like there's a lot that doesn't carry over, but actually the habit and the scheduling and the pacing and the structuring actually really did. It surprised me how useful it was. And then the same thing for kids nonfiction and a kids novel. Like there's a lot that's different, especially if you're interested in different genres. But boy, the habit and the pacing and the place it takes in your life, it can really keep going. And honestly, even though I learned nothing about fiction or satire or what have you from the King's nonfiction program, I learned so much from that program that benefits in all the types of writing I do.
I just wanted to say that I think I want another project. I don't know, but in this space between sort of the promoting the book and then now it's all coming to an end, and what do I want to do next? What I find is helpful is just asking that question. So I find myself in that phase of just asking the question, what might I do next? And where are my interests? And are there any partnerships I might, so I've met with people, I've had coffee with people, I've asked questions, I've shown them cartoons of where, how in healthcare I might go, and if anything comes out of it, great. I've also taken this course so I can actually learn to cartoon. Like I say, my first book was just passion, but now I'm learning a lot more about that particular genre, and I'm loving it, and I'm deepening my skills. And also there's some questions about grants. I got a Canada Council grant that helped me a lot. It didn't make me money, but I used it to hire people to do scanning and promotional work, things I didn't have the energy for. So Canada Council was certainly very good for me. So as well as Arts Nova Scotia, but my publisher applied for that for me. So yes, just leave no stone unturned. That's my motto.
So I'm working on a novel now, which I find even harder than nonfiction, and a screenplay, which I find really fun to do. So it's to get the time to do that. Like I said, you need an accountability. And one of the ex-King's graduates, Nell and Lampert, and I meet an hour each work weekday at like 8 o'clock for an hour, just on Zoom, in silent, on mute, and just work on our own projects as a way of showing up, because otherwise I wouldn't come to my computer at that hour. I'd probably go for an extra coffee. And so that really helps. And again, you can establish these relationships either within the program or without. And we took advantage of different challenges like NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month, to help you move along the way, or even the screenplay challenge where we locked ourselves away for 48 hours to just start writing it and hopefully finish it. But so I would challenge yourself, and I'm not going to lie, like I've had a lot of energy problems to do this. Like it's grueling. It really is, like, but you just chisel away and like baby steps, and before you know it, you see your word count at 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, and you think, wow, it's moving along.
Thanks, Christian. I don't know, did you want to speak to that, Laura, working on the next
Well,
project? Or?
It's timely for me because my book only just came out 12 days ago, same day as a certain Royals book hit the shelves. And so I feel like I'm doing a lot of publicity stuff still, and I'm doing interviews and I'm kind of caught up in that book. And I don't want to shortchange it by, turning my attention to something else, but maybe that's just an alibi for why I haven't turned my attention yet. I took out a huge number of books for my next book project in the summer to take to the cottage with me, and the box is still sitting in my living room, and I just got a bill from Toronto Public Library today for $650 So that's, as soon as this is over, that's what I'm doing, is I'm returning those books, but I'll take them out again. Like I feel bad that I didn't do anything, but I think that it's because I didn't realize how much time and energy would be devoted to the promotion of this book. So I'm interested to hear people's strategies and the idea of, I mean, I take a lot of comfort from the idea of having faith that what I learned will find future application, again, the habits, and with another book. So I'm just trying to stir myself. And also Marilyn and I belong to a book writing group that is a splinter of our cohort at King's. And for ever since the pandemic started, like every single Tuesday night, almost without fail, we meet. And we talk about things more than writing, but we certainly always talk about writing. And I think we're a great source of support and sounding board service for each other. So I'll echo what other people have said about the value of getting a writing group around you, getting peers around you, so you don't feel so isolated in your efforts.
Thanks, Laura. And, I'm going to just answer my own question here and take over for a second. But I'm so glad you brought up the idea of a writing group. And I was in the same cohort as Christian, and we belonged to a small writing group that came out of our King's experience. And for me, like the sort of daunting nature of the second book, I thought was initially about my reluctance to not want to have to write again, and face that fear that can come along with the next project. And then as I started to think more and more about it, I realized it was because I had a very sort of high ambition for how I wanted to approach the structure of that next book. And it was going to just take some time. I mean, sometimes that's the reality of it. And what my writing group gave me was, of course, a sounding board to talk through some of these things, but also an opportunity to work on another project. And so we ended up gathering together to edit a book, an anthology on productivity as a writer. That was, something that we were all thinking about quite a bit. And so it was nice to kind of offload some of that energy and those thoughts into a project that allowed us to also be social with each other. So, and I guess that what that does is open up another question I have for all of you, which is, now that you've gone through this process of publishing a book, what do you think the writing life is? This is going to be a very personal question, I think, for all of you, but what does the writing life look like to you? And what would you tell our participants how to think about their writing lives as they embark upon them and see them unfold? Okay, I'm being met with silence.
Well, I think we're all fighting to see who's going to go
Yeah.
first.
Well, I'm fighting the urge, Christian, to be the loudmouth who keeps jumping in every time. Like when you host a live radio show, you learn to, well, hopefully you learn to be quiet and let other people talk. So I'm trying to employ that right now. Does that, Christian, were you about to go first there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, for me, it's probably the most excitement in my life. Like it's something that I look forward to, the idea of working on these projects. Because, I had one novel, which is now branched off into like potentially a trilogy. Then I have a completely different novel that I want to write. I'm not so much in the nonfiction right now because I was going to do a nonfiction, but I realize it's a lot of work and I don't have time to jet off and do all these interviews and so forth. So, and I really wanted to explore the creative side, and I didn't think I could do it. And when I sat down and forced myself to start, I was very shocked to see how the words started to come and how the scene played out in a movie in your brain and how you can, capture that. So the strategies for me were just, either talk it out there's so much tech available now that there's really no excuse not to write. At least that's what I tell myself. You can, dictate it on your watch as you're walking in your car. You can, do whatever it takes. And that's what the writing life is nonstop. A lot of it is just sitting in the shower thinking about it. I have a notepad in my shower for these little moments, right? Like it's the writing life doesn't stop at the hour that you dedicate in the morning. It goes throughout. And so just be able to capture everything, and whether it's through notepads, through watch dictation, or note showers, that's where it is. And then just bring it all together, and then, you know, during those hours or 2 hours that you have each day, and develop something new. And it just, the feeling of accomplishment of just doing a paragraph or a chapter or the end book is something that makes life thrilling, I think.
I just wanted to say that the creative life is lonely and hard, but also very, very, very rewarding. So I found a new habit that it wasn't a resolution, but it just sort of appeared after New Year that so I always drew since the time I could hold a pencil. I always drew, but somewhere along the line, you know, grade 4, I was told I wasn't a good drawer, and I put it away. And I did do a BFA, but I had no confidence coming out of that still. And I guess this is a really good time to be a creator, because there is a lot more support and writing and podcasts that tell you just keep going, you know, and don't listen to that inner critic. And I wish I had had that when I was much younger. But my new habit now is make the coffee, go to the studio, which is a spare bedroom, I have to say. But, you know, walk into that space, have your coffee, and draw, and just see what happens. And then the rest of my day is so, after I spend an hour and a half doing that with my coffee, even if I'm foggy early morning brain, which is afternoon for me, I still takes, I never feel that pressure afterwards that why didn't I draw today? So again, habits are really important. And I wish I could find a cartoonist to work with, but I'm kind of a freak among freaks, because I'm an older woman doing cartoons, and mostly it's younger people writing graphic memoirs and graphic cartoons, and they don't want to be with me because they're, you know, they're writing about finding their identities and understanding, and like I found my identity so long ago, you know, I'm no longer questioning my identity. But so I want to find out why healthcare can't be better. So there aren't many cartoonists with that same question.
I feel like I am a journalist by trade, and so and always have been. So for me, the writing life is how I've always made my living. Um, One of the most beautiful things about Kings for me was that I felt like it finally earned me entry into the creative life, you know. So when people would talk about the writing life, I always felt a bit like, yeah, but that's, you know, that's me just scratching out a living, and it didn't feel as special as I knew it could feel. And it's thanks to Kings and, you know, their guidance and help to uh, in my finding my voice, as it were. I feel like now I'm living the writer's life. Like now I feel, uh, you know, like for a long time, I haven't called myself a journalist, because there's just not very much journalism out there anymore. And I felt a bit fraudulent calling myself a journalist. Um, but calling myself a writer, you know, I think it would call to mind in people um, uh, a character that I wasn't yet worthy of claiming as my own. But since I wrote this book and have entered into this world that King's opened up to me, I feel legitimate now, claiming the writer's life and saying, yes, I am a writer now. And it's great. I love it. Like I feel like special. I feel the specialness of the writer's life, and I'm thrilled to be living it. It's great fun.
That's lovely. So Marilyn, yeah.
Yeah, I guess what I'd add is that the writing life or even the creative life is not just all about the writing. So there's a lot of things you have to do to make sure that you're, so I have 2 books out in the world now. I spend at least a day a week on maintaining their profile in the world, whether that's making sure that my various online things are, up to date and then I'm active enough, or I'm doing a radio interview this week about the second book. I'm doing various things, but you have to keep on top of it. So it's not just carving out, it's not just sitting there in your garret or your studio and just waxing eloquent and getting your words on the page. It's about all of the hygiene that has to happen about the stuff that you've put out there. And I've had a blog for 14 years now, and that's work too. I mean, my cadence of publishing has gotten less over the years, but once you get a cadence going, you have to keep going. So I'm trying to up that this year to, instead of twice a month, try to get back to my weekly cadence, which is discipline as well. And it's like, what the heck am I going to write about, and all that kind of thing. So there's lots of stuff around the edges of the sort of core creative work that are part of that life that you have to embrace if you're going to be truly part of that life.
And I'll just say, hopefully quickly, that actually, without being too dramatic, hopefully not melodramatic about it, I think writing for me has become a bit of an anchor for the rest of my life, which it risks overstating it, but I don't think it does, because like Laura said, I've been a daily journalist for years, and you're writing all the time, even though it's for radio and there's some web writing, but it just feels like the pace of social media and daily media these days, things are just flowing through us, and they're gone and forgotten so quickly, it seems. And this for me was a way of kind of anchoring and my thoughts and the way I interact with the world. So to put a long story short, I'm writing some of the many books that I want to read that I can't find elsewhere, and it's very, very satisfying, and it has actually rejuvenated both my professional and to some extent personal life as well. So I'm grateful to have found it, and consider myself really lucky, whether any books are bestsellers or not. And so far I've been fairly lucky, but that's not what it's about to me. And that goes back to my earlier comment about the money is don't do it for any thoughts of money, which of course come to some writers and not to others, and then in varying degrees to others. But it has to be something, I think, that you have to do.
Well, that's wonderful responses from all of you. Thank you. I love thinking about what the writing life can look like, and maybe it would be great to end with our last question here, which I think is quite a fun one. Can you talk about promotion and interviews for your book? Do you have some examples or stories that kind of took you from that solitude of writing out into the world where you get to share with others? What was that promotion process like for all of you?
Oh, I have to say, just because it's on my mind, I did an interview at the beginning of this week, a radio interview with this guy who he approached me on LinkedIn, and anyway, I looked him up, and he's got some small radio thing coming out of Mississauga, and it looked like it was business. Like, I don't know why he wanted to interview me. Anyway, I did the interview. He was awful. He was just terrible, this guy. He kept calling me Laura Platt. And he kept confusing the word heartbreak with breakup. At one point, even calling my book Breakup, and then really pushing me to tell me how to get over a breakup. And I had to keep saying to him, well, I don't know. Like, that's not what I wrote about. That's and then he told me in the break that how he'd stumbled upon me was he cheated on his girlfriend just recently, and the woman had broken up with him, and he'd seen a photo of her holding my book, And I just know that this guy was looking, he was thinking, oh, the ex is creeping me and she'll be listening to my radio program. And won't she think I'm enlightened and wonderful that I too am thinking about heartbreak? And then he comes back, and this was also on Zoom because he's got this on a YouTube channel, which I wish somebody had told me before I did it. But anyway, now he wants to ask me about, well, what about the person who did the breaking up? Isn't his heart broken too? And he really wanted me to play that side up. Anyway, so all of which to say, beware the people interviewing you and their own agenda. Because this guy really caught me off guard, and he was a fool. And he said, boy, I'm gonna read this book. And I'm like, wait, you haven't even read it? Anyway, and then, you know, good luck with your girlfriend getting back, because she's going to think you're so wonderful and like on it, because you're speaking with somebody who's written the book that she's reading. Like, anyway, they're not all bad, but that one was particularly bad. And then he tags me on LinkedIn, and he's written my name wrong, and so I just had to correct him and say, hey, buddy, you know, you got my name wrong. Fool. Anyway, not to turn anybody off. I've also had lots of wonderful interviews and promotional stuff, and more to come. So, but that one was just beware, just learn something about the person interviewing you, because they might be in it for something that's nothing to do with you.
I can, like, I did a lot of radio interviews, and I think without the promotion, I would have been sunk, because my book came out right in the middle of the pandemic. So I didn't have a chance to go to any bookstores or anything like that. So I was like, it was exhausting. So there's like, I think the CBC has you go across the world or across the country, and like you get 10 minutes here, and then you got like an hour off, and then another 10 minutes, and then in 30 minutes you have another one. So it's like, that was part exhausting. I was really lucky. And that's when I think because of King's, I got my agent, and because of my agent, I got Random House. It was like a domino effect. And if I didn't have that, there would have been zero promotion, I'm sure of it. I don't think I would have had any splash. And I got on The Current, which I think was a really helpful for me, because again, in the middle of the pandemic, you're kind of, you know, throwing a coin in the pond, and there's a couple ripples and then that's it. But without that exposure, it wouldn't have happened. And then I got in the newspaper, and it's all part of that kind of perpetual thing. But then the next book launch week comes out and you're forgotten. So you have to, like I think Marilyn was saying, you have to, you know, take it upon yourself more than the people, because they'll forget you, and it's now you're onto you where you have to do it. So I did a couple of podcasts, and I have actually a speaking engagement coming up in March at a church, which I'm kind of intrigued about. I don't know if I'm going to be, you know, vilified or embraced. We'll soon see. So
I just wanted to say that promotion is hard, and I didn't get support from because I had a small indie publisher, and I didn't have an agent, and I tried to hire a couple of people, but it didn't seem to work out. So it was really all me and what I could do and my energy levels, and I didn't have much take up locally, like which I found interesting. But again, I got most of the podcasts and the interviews and the accolades through the graphic medicine community in the States. So I had started going to graphic medicine conferences like long before, well, before I retired, because I was in healthcare communications. And I was curious, how can visuals help with healthcare communications? So I became a known face at graphic medicine, and I knew the organizers, and I made myself known to the organizers. And so when it did come, like close to 10 years after I first started going to those conferences, I was a known quantity, and they So they really supported me, not so much with promotion, but the fact that they endorsed my book and that the right people who attended the graphic medicine conference, like from Kaiser Permanente and also from the Harvard Med School Library, they endorsed my book. That went really far for me in terms of promotion. So, yeah, know your audience, I guess.
And I'll just add to that. I felt like my own experience of promoting the book was really fun because I had dual book launches in Calgary, where my book takes place, and in Toronto, where I live. And so invited all kinds of family and friends to it. But because my book was about music, I was able to plan concerts around the book launch. So I got people out on the sort of basis of seeing a concert. We had a great set of live music, and then the book was just sort of part and parcel of the whole event. So I personally had a great time promoting the book for that reason, that I could hear more of the music that I had written about and loved so much. We're at the end of our time here, and I just want to say thanks to all of our participants who came and joined us and asked us such great questions. Stephen Kimber has been here, and Kim Pittaway, and I'm here all the time to answer any of your questions that you may have about the King's MFA programs. We have one starting in fiction in June, and of course we continue our nonfiction program. So we're happy to answer any of your questions. You can contact us through the King's website and through any of our own websites. But I especially want to say thank you to our panelists, Marilyn Carr, Susan McLeod, Gregor Craigie, Laura Pratt, and Christian Smith. You've all offered us such wonderful insight into the writing and publishing process, all from very different perspectives. And it was an enlightening and heartwarming and inspiring session. So thanks to all of you, and we hope to see you all soon. All right.
Thanks, Jillian.
Everyone.
Thanks, Dylan.
Okay.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.